Can foreigners own an S corporation in the United States? In this video, I'm going to go through the S corporation election and how foreign nationals who own, U.S. companies, whether or not they can elect to, be taxed as an S corporation. In what cases is it possible? In what cases does it make sense? In which cases it doesn't make sense? What the traps are? So basically, we're going to talk about, S corporations for foreigners. First and foremost, thank you for coming back to the channel and watching this video. I'm attorney Adrian Pandev, and I try to make navigating the maze that is the U.S. government easier for foreigners. This includes both, immigration, tax, corporate law, basically company formation and asset protection advice. So in this video, we're going to chat about S corporations, their advantages, and in what cases does it make sense, or in what cases is it allowed for a foreign national owner to actually own an S corporation in the US. So as background, S corporations, right, it's basically a tax election, right? If you own a US corporation, if a US LLC, you can elect by filing a form with the IRS to be taxed as an S corporation, right? And obviously your accountant, tax advisors, lawyers can do this for you, but the bottom line is you file an S election with the IRS, and after that your company is going to be treated as an S corporation. Now, why is this important, and why do so many people do it, and why may your accountant, tax advisor, whoever be advising you to do this? So if you own a corporation, right, you're a shareholder of a corporation, and that's just to keep it simple, right? If you own 100% of that corporation, you're going to pay on profits, like corporate profits, you're going to pay corporate income tax of 21% at the federal level. And then on any dividends distributed to you, right, the owner, the shareholder of the corporation, you're going to pay personal income taxes on top of that, right? They can go up as high as 37%, depending on your income. So the bottom line here is that you're paying taxes twice, and you could be paying taxes twice at very high rates. In addition to these federal rates, you also have state income taxes, right? So several states levy corporate income taxes at the corporation level, and then there's state personal income taxes on your income. So the bottom line is this could get incredibly inefficient. You could pay a ton of taxes. So how does an S corporation help you with this? Well, what an S corporation allows you to do is it basically eliminates that corporate level 21% plus the state, if applicable, right, tax, and it becomes a pass-through basically entity, and you will pay taxes on your personal tax return on that income, right? But you will forego the 21 plus the state, right, income taxes. So it's a huge benefit that most people want to exercise, right? Now, another reason that I just briefly want to touch on why a lot of tax advisors are recommending S corporations is to avoid self-employment taxes. This mostly applies to LLC owners, right, rather than people who own corporations. Basically, in an LLCs are already by default pass-through entities, right? So you don't have this corporate tax issue. But what you do have is that you have to pay self-employment taxes, which are 15.3% on that income. But what you can do with an S corporation, if you pay yourself a reasonable salary from your company, on that salary between you and the company, you will cover that 15.3%, so you're not really saving much. But any dividend distributions basically to you, so profit distributions on top of that, you can avoid this 15.3% self-employment tax. So the bottom line is, whether you're structured as a corporation or an LLC that's passed through partnership or sole proprietorship, electing to be an S corporation can help you save a tremendous amount in taxes, and that is why many receive this advice. The problem is, and this is why I'm recording this video, that there's a lot of restrictions with S corporations, and for many foreign nationals, you have to be incredibly careful with this S election, because you could end up in major trouble, to put it bluntly. And often what I see is, unfortunately, that a lot of tax advisors, right, do not have experience working with foreigners. They don't understand the differences between, various visas, their tax implications, people who don't have visas, who are abroad, permanent residents, etc. Right? So my goal with this video is to help clarify all of this. So here's the bottom line, right? If you're a non-resident taxpayer, again, this has to do with taxes. If you file a non-resident personal income tax return, right, you cannot own an S corporation. And even if you just have 1%, right, so say, one stock out of 100 in a corporation, and you're a non-resident alien when it comes to taxes, you cannot make this S Corp election. And if you do, or if the corporation or the company does, it's a major issue, and it could really hurt you in the future, right? If you are a foreign national in the U.S. and you can be on H-1B, O-1, whatever status you have, E-2, you're permanent resident, right? And you file a resident return, then there's no issues with electing this S corporation. And I see a lot of confusion. So the first point I want to make here, right, is that the limitation on who can elect to be an S corp, file an S election when it comes to ownership has to do with whether you're a tax resident or a non-resident when it comes to the tax code, right? Now, the video would get extremely long to go over each and every visa category and explain at what point do you become a tax resident. But generally speaking, right, you become a tax resident, right, by satisfying the substantial presence test. If you've spent a sufficient amount of days in the U.S. In the particular year or over the last 3 years, you can become a U.S. tax resident by just being here a sufficient amount of days. Additionally, you automatically become a tax resident the moment you become a U.S. permanent resident, the moment you get your green card, right? These are the two main analyses you need to know. So the first question is, right, when it comes to this S election for any foreign national, is whether or not you are a tax resident. Now, where I want everyone to be very careful is that even though you satisfy the substantial presence test in the U.S., you can often elect to not be taxed as a U.S. Tax resident. So an example of that is, for example, often F1 students on OPT who own companies and start companies who've not been here for 5+ years, you're generally treated as a non-resident, right? So in that scenario, you cannot be an S Corp, right? So this is where you need to very carefully analyze your case, and it's very case by case specific approach. It's not a one size fits all, because it depends on you and what makes sense, right? Depending on the business and depending on foreign income and various other factors, it may be beneficial to not be a U.S. tax resident, right? And many of the tax treaties the U.S. has allow you to make an election that you want to be taxed as a non-resident because you have a closer connection to the other treaty country, your home country, right? But what you need to understand, I just want to make this abundantly clear, right, that if you're a U.S. tax resident and you're filing a U.S. Personal tax return as a tax resident, in that case, you can make this S election, right? It doesn't, matter that you're here on a visa. However, if you're not, right, and even if you're here on a visa, but you're filing as a non-resident for tax purposes, you won't be able to make this S election, and this is absolutely critical. This is the first and most important point I want to make in this video, right? My second point is, when it comes to analyzing whether this makes sense, you need to map this out and, to put it bluntly, model this out. Like, you need to look at your specific circumstances and whether or not it makes sense to be a U.S. tax resident, first of all, right, if you have an option. And second of all, whether you will actually save by making this S election, because not in all cases do you save, right? It's not applicable. It's not a benefit in each and every case all the time. There's a lot of other considerations here. And this is the sort of final point I want to make here, which is that I see online, and this has been the case for years now, where S corporations are sold as if it's a solution for everything. There's very many scenarios in which an S corporation will actually cost you a lot of money, right? One example that comes to mind is real estate investments, right? Generally speaking, you want to structure those as, pass-through entities that go on Schedule E on your tax return. You do not want to put those in a S corporation generally, again, right? Like I can't apply this to each and every case, but you should be aware of that, right? If you're investing in real estate and you're told to form all kinds of S corporations, you should do some research. You should talk to tax advisors and just be careful. Similarly, your goals will determine whether or not this makes sense, right? So while S corporations can save you on taxes, right? Say you're looking to raise venture capital, right? And you're speaking to various funds, they will most likely want you to be a C corporation. They will want to invest in C corporations. So by electing this S Corp, by making this S Corp election, you may actually hurt your chances of raising substantial capital, which is an absolute disadvantage to you, right? And then finally, right, in many cases, right, even though there is a potential tax advantage, right, the final numbers will show in the totality of your basically international global tax structure that you're in, that it just doesn't make sense. So the bottom line is plan ahead. Work with someone that understands this, or self-educate really well, but please don't fall for the trap that S corporations are for everyone and that they work well in each and every case. That is simply not true. So what your takeaway should be from this video is that if you're a foreigner, right, investing in the US, you own companies in the US, and you're being told to make this S election, it may make sense. However, make sure that the company can actually do that, and that that you're eligible to make that election. And if so, make sure that you're factoring in the totality of your circumstances and not just looking at one bit, which is this US company, that you look at your total global income and whether or not it makes sense to make this election and to become separately a US tax resident. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, post them in the comments and I'll do my very best to record more videos on these topics. Thank you for watching.